Hello and welcome back to the Villa Filler podcast. I'm here as always with my good friend Dan Wiseman. Dan, I feel like we've done this intro about 4 times over the past few days. It's just not happened for us, has it? But it's been busy. It's been Christmas. I'm sure you guys have been busy as well and not necessarily worried about what Dan and I are doing. But nevertheless, we've got so much to catch up on, mate, haven't we? But before we get into all that, how are you doing, mate?
Yes, I'm all good, thank you, mate. It's good to be back. It feels like it's been a while. A lot has happened, and I dare say a lot is going to happen over the next month or so. So this is just going to be it, I feel, because once the transfer window opens, I dare say we'll be making 1 or 2 dives into the market, which is exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially after the past couple of results, obviously you guys, we haven't really checked in with you guys since the draw to Sheffield United and the loss to Manchester United only the other day. But yeah, we hope you guys all had a fantastic Christmas and are going to have a happy New Year. But it would be rude for us not to acknowledge them games, mate. And I think I saw a stat the other day. I think we played 9 games in 31 days. So am I surprised that we started to drop points? Not really, no. I think fatigue is always going to happen. You know, we kind of spoke after the Brentford game, didn't we, mate, about how big of a miss Boubacar Kamara was going to be. And we kind of thought before we'd be able to get by, and we sort of learnt our lesson, didn't we? He's so integral to the team, not even just the midfield, the whole team. He keeps us ticking. And I was sort of having this conversation with a chap sat next to me in the away end at Old Trafford. And he was saying how much of a big miss Pau is. And whilst I don't disagree, I think Kamara out of the pair, even the trio, if you want to throw Tielemans in, Kamara's the most important player that's probably out for Aston Villa at the moment. And, you know, these past few games have really shown how much we really do struggle without him. And, you know, to maybe focus a bit more on the United, I'm really narrowing it down on the Manchester United game. It felt like it almost felt too good to be true, didn't it, mate? That we went into halftime 2-0 up because we scored the 2 goals. You know, set pieces really important. How we managed to get the leads. Then Donker stepping up massively, but United were awful. They were terrible, and there aren't words to describe how bad Manchester United were in that first half. They were dreadful. We were also pretty bad, but we were just lucky that Manchester United was significantly worse than us. And I come back to the point of missing Kamara and missing Tielemans as well. We didn't have control of that midfield for the whole game. And we got away with it in the first half because of just how bad Manchester United were. But in the second half, we really suffered from that sort of lack of control from the central midfield.
Yeah, I mean, Booba's such a big loss. He's one that often goes under the radar. I think when you talk about Villa's most important players, and, you know, both you and I have kind of said that maybe at points this season, he's not quite been perhaps as good as we've seen him last year, particularly. But, you know, we've won none of the last 3 games that we've played without Booba. Our record overall in the Premier League is played 17, won 6, drawn 6, lost 5. So given how good our form generally has been, I dare say most, if not all of the defeats that we've seen under Emery have been as a result of Kamara not being in the side. He's so important, really anchors that midfield and keeps things very measured. And I think that's kind of the same thing we felt without Pau as well, in that we just lost that level-headedness in the back line. I think Carlos is a bit more of a bruiser. He's the brute in that back line, and we all kind of understand the dynamic now between Torres and Carlos. But you can really see that without Kamara and without Pau, that Villa, once the heat started to turn up, once United got 1 goal, 2 goal, we really struggled to play through to like United in the way that we normally do. Passes were going astray, players were panicking a little bit more, the crowd was getting up, and passes were going out for throw-ins, being intercepted, and it just kind of added to the inevitability of it all that United were going to come back and win that game. And so they did. And I think when you look at Villa without Kamara, there's obviously not a like-for-like replacement in there. And look, we have to give credit to Leander Dendoncker. He is obviously, in terms of profile, the most natural replacement for Booba. But obviously, despite the goal, and I honestly think Dendoncker, when he's been called upon this season, has done very well, but the levels just aren't the same. And you kind of felt that without those two players particularly, it always felt that, once United got one, we were struggling. And those kind of normal passages of play, those normal routines, the triangles between the defence and the midfield that allow us to unlock the opposition, get guys in behind on the shoulder, get balls out to the wings to Bailey. They just weren't happening. It was all kind of unravelling. And as I say, once United get one, get two, you knew what was coming. And I think Booba's a real miss. And maybe it's a blessing in disguise. January just around the corner, that these glaring kind of holes in the squad are starting to crop up. We know that Dendoncker was close to a move in the summer. Be interesting to see if anything kind of comes up for him in January. But the same with Longley coming in at centre-back, in that they're both very good players in their own right, Dendoncker and Longley, but the players that they're replacing are just of a quality that we can't match, really. And that's where it gets a little bit difficult.
It's quite telling that, isn't it, mate, that, I agree. I think Dendoncker and Longley were probably our two best players on the pitch against United, and it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough, which maybe it's less of an indictment on them and more so on the rest of the team. But I think, a lot of it you could put down to the amount of games, fatigue. Old Trafford, is a very tough place to go. And I think if anybody, at Old Trafford, any fan base who are 2-0 up at Old Trafford and still didn't think they were going to win the game, I think Aston Villa, probably one of the only ones. Our record there has been hideous for as long as we've been alive, mate. I think we've only seen Villa win 3 times at Old Trafford in our lifetime, which is crazy to think. But I think, and I look at it, there's some sort of teething issues with other members of the squad, and I think, I look at people like, Ramsey looked well off it. Well, he'd been out injured for so long.
Yeah,
you've got to play him into form. We had the same thing with Zaniolo, with all these guys. When you bring new guys in, you have to sort of play them into form. And I don't think we'll see the best of JJ for another probably 2 months, really, because he's been out for quite a long time when you think about it. I know he kind of made a cameo in that Brighton game, scored, but before then he was injured since almost the start of the season, and he's been out since then. So, there's that. And I think ultimately, it's, the past week has just been a bit of a reality check for us, because, we've got carried away. We've been excited about our position and being in the title race and this and that. The inevitability is that we will drop off and we won't be a part of the title race, but hopefully, and I think we will be part of the top 4, top 5 race for those Champions League spots. I think that is realistic given what we've done so far at the halfway mark. But I think we've sort of, it's humbled a few Villa fans, I think, or at least I hope it has, because it's only, you only go back a week and a half, mate, and people are saying what fantastic squad depth we've got, and then all of a sudden there's these 2 games and it's like, we've not got squad depth. Well, how have we flipped so quickly? I know we've got injuries. We had those same injuries 1.5 weeks ago. Dendoncker coming on, doing what he does, against Arsenal and in those kind of games. Same for Longley when he's stepping in the Europa Conference League games. It's all right saying, we've got depth when those guys are on the bench, but when we've actually, had to call upon them, and again, they didn't play bad whatsoever. They were our best players. It's just funny how the narrative has all of a sudden flipped to squad's not good enough, need a left back, need another 10 DMs, all this kind of stuff. Obviously, all reactionary just because we've lost. But I think the reality is we probably do need 3 or 4 players. I think we need a right back. I think we probably need another left back just to be safe, because obviously Dean's injured as well now. We don't know to what extent that is from the late offside flag. Probably need another striker. Another midfielder as well. Really, just looking at it. So there's holes that can definitely be plugged, and I'm sure they will be, made, because obviously January is literally right around the corner. So it's going to be interesting to see how we move. But I think, in terms of off the field stuff, mate, I'm sure you've read the sort of the note from the latest fan consultation from Mohamed said and all that. Obviously, I think the headline news from that was that seemingly the North Stand plans have been scrapped. And we spoke about this a few weeks ago when it was sort of full steam ahead, we're doing this, and then all of a sudden it's, well, we're not going to do it next year. And now it's, well, actually, we're just going to look to add another 3,000 seats. Seemingly, you would imagine, by filling in the corners, connecting the North Stand to the Dug and the Trinity. Quite underwhelming, really, mate, isn't it? And maybe I'm reading too much into it. I know we sort of debated about sort of moving away, but is this the sort of ownership, you know, having one eye on that, on not wanting to do too much work on Villa Park if they potentially are going to move out of Aston and to, you know, wherever it may be?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. And off the pitch, for on a commercial level, the future does feel a little bit blurred. You know, we're kind of hoping that this gets eased going into the kind of 150th anniversary celebrations and everything like that. Both you and I have kind of said that provides the perfect cloud in which Villa can really go away and tinker with things and almost provide them the perfect excuse to scrap things like the old badge and everything like that, in that the timing has been perfect, because you can sort of say that, oh, you know, we need a new crest to reflect the 150th anniversary that celebrates Villa's history better than the current edition and everything like that. We know that Chris Heck has really come in and ripped up the floorboards from that side of things. And it's interesting that the redevelopment, my stance on this is difficult, and I almost sympathise with the club because, yes, you know, we can't go into the Champions League with 36,000 seats. That is apparent. We need to maximise that, not just, you know, having as many fans in the ground to benefit on-field performance should we get into that competition, or even in the Europa League. To be honest with you, you know, we've seen that even in Europe this season we have struggled, and that we've seen that how Villa Park can really be a big factor in getting teams over the line. We need to make sure that there's sufficient fans able to be in the ground that have the best experience possible, from the concourses to the toilets to the food, but like everything is kind of as good as it can be going into that competition. And, you know, if you're playing with 3 stands or 3.5 stands, whatever it might be, you're not going to get that. But what I will say is that you need to do it at some point. It has to be done at some point. And if the club's vision for the future is onwards and upwards, and that there will be no plateau, that the Villa are restoring themselves to this end of the Premier League table, and that is it, that's where we're going to lock ourselves in for the next 10 or 15 years, then it has to come at some point. You have to do it at some point. And you're only going to make it harder for yourself further down the line. So we can't put it off too soon. And so we need to make sure that whatever plan is in place has, you know, it's kind of, I know it's short-term loss, long-term gain, but you have to find that middle ground. You don't want to go too short-term gain, long-term loss, because I dare say that anything that we do to the North Stand in 10 years, 15 years, you're probably going to have to, unless you're flattening it, you're probably going to have to look at doing it again. And then more problems come with, you know, we're moving to the new Champions League format potentially next season. We know there's more games, more teams, and more money in it than ever before. You want to be able to get as much of a piece of that pie as possible. And so, yeah, we definitely need some clarity on that one.
I think the argument from the club is that, well, we've not actually sold out many games this season, and they're right, but there are reasons for that. I think you'll find most of the unoccupied seats at Villa Park are terrace view seats, which are obviously too expensive. You've got to factor in the shoddy infrastructure and all of the, you know, you're sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? Because it's like, we're not going to go ahead with the stadium redevelopment until we get the Whitton Station sorted out. But the Whitton Station isn't going to get sorted out until the council approve it and all this stuff, and only if we're actually going to improve the infrastructure. So all these things are also sort of dependent on one another, and there's so many other external factors. You know, ticket pricing obviously being one as well. I think the only games where I think the club are right to say, well, we've not sold out, are the European games, because I think, in fairness to the club, the tickets for the European games have been reasonably priced. And I would say I've been disappointed with the turnout, considering how much of a fuss we all made as a fan base about going. And listen, I totally understand the sort of the circumstances that most of us, even you and I, find ourselves in, mate. It's not possible for so many people to get there due to financial reasons, but for however many people are allegedly on the waiting list, and for how cheap the tickets are, the math doesn't really math. Why we're probably doing a couple thousand less on a Thursday night than we are on the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that's people have their own reasons, and that's that. But that's just my 2 cents on that. But yeah, all these things do have to improve. The tickets have to be more affordable. The transportation has to be there. I mean, like for you, mate, you've got to get down from Manchester. If you're coming down, it's not just you. Chloe's going to come. So you have 2 lots of tickets. Obviously, you may even need somewhere to stay, depending on if you can't stay with family and all that kind of stuff. So I do understand it is going to the football in the current economic climate is just not attainable for so many people, which is a shame, and the club needs to do something about that. But again, you can't see that happening until, from the club's perspective, if they're not selling out, why would they add another 15, 20,000 seats to the stadium? It doesn't make sense to them. But again, they have to take a look at themselves in the mirror and sort that out themselves, really. Take a look at how they've been moving in terms of prices, and not only just for the regular match day going fans, but the season ticket holders as well. But that's my rant about the current state of Villa off the pitch at the moment. It's a bit of a mess, isn't it?
Yeah, it needs sorting out, mate. It definitely needs sorting out. But we've got to have faith that it will be, that Chris Heck is simply, you've got to make more of a mess to get things clean, sort of thing. And so let's see what he's kind of got in store. The communication feels a little bit mixed, and I do have a lot of sympathy with the fans, and I think the season ticket waiting lists, I don't think that you can translate that to match by match attendances. Not personally, I totally agree with you, mate, in that if you look at it as you mentioned, mate, in this current economic climate, if you look at everything from a value for money point of view, the money that and season tickets as they are currently are extortionately priced. But even so, if you bought 60 single match tickets, 38 single, with cup games and everything like that, so about 30 single match tickets across the season versus a season ticket, where you're going to get better value for money. So people are more inclined to say, okay, I'll put 600 quid down for a season ticket rather than pay 50 to go once. The value is there, and that's why season tickets sell far better than single match tickets do. And so, I do think that the two don't necessarily correlate. It's interesting that the club are going down that route. It's also interesting that they wouldn't reveal the maximum capacity for Terrace View and for the lower grounds. That said that there's about 500 season tickets in Terrace View and everything like that, that things are going really well. But when asked, okay, what percentage is that of capacity, the club weren't too keen to reveal that, which is revealing in itself, potentially. So, there's a few things where we're kind of being kept behind a glass door and we're not necessarily getting the full picture. And look, there's never going to be a full transfer, nor should there be. Not right, because there are certain things that need to remain private and everything like that. And God forbid, if we knew every little intricacy about Aston Villa behind the scenes, the meltdown would be off the charts. These people are experts; they need to be trusted to run the business side of Villa Park as they see fit. But on these key contact points with the fans, tickets, badges, merchandising, the gap and the understanding is just getting further and further apart. And that's where I think the club need to do something.
Mate, spot on. I really do feel like the club are using that waiting list of allegedly over 20,000 to pressure fans, if anything. I would honestly hedge my bet, and guys, tell me if I'm wrong in the comments. I'm sure there's going to be a portion of the listeners who are potentially on the waiting list or don't have a season ticket, so could provide us with another perspective on this. If we were to wake up on Saturday and there's an extra 10,000 seats all of a sudden in Villa Park, and they were going to welcome 10,000 extra season tickets, I reckon you wouldn't even get half of the people say yes, due to how expensive they are, the commitment. it's one of them things where, you know, when the waiting list came up, people put themselves on it so as they could have the opportunity, obviously. But if the club offer you one and you say no, you're then at the back of the list. So the club are almost pressuring you to say yes, which I don't think is fair given the prices, given how much they've gone up over the past few years as well. And you're right about it being value for money, mate. It certainly is when you compare it to paying on a match-by-match basis. But I think I don't like how the club have almost weaponized the waiting list to be like, well, if you don't get it now, you ain't getting in, basically. That's not right to me. Although what I would caveat that with is I think if the season tickets were more reasonably priced, then those magical 10,000 seats that I've just proposed probably would get filled. But just right now, in the current economic climate, it just doesn't seem viable to so many people. You know, which again is totally understandable, and this isn't me picking on Villa fans or trying to sort of create a divide between Villa fans. That's just the reality of people's finances, and it doesn't make you less of a fan if you can't afford the season ticket either. That's not what I'm sort of getting at all. I just, as I say, I've got beef with the Villa ticket people, mate. I think certainly the way they've handled as away fans has been despicable. And like I say, I feel like they're sort of forcing a wedge between the fans with this sort of season ticket waiting list and pressuring Villa fans, true Villa fans, to make really difficult decisions when it comes to sort of committing money and time to the club. And that upsets me, to be honest. That's not fair at all.
No, I agree, mate.
But we should probably leave that talk there, because otherwise I feel like I'm just going to get even more upset. We've got Burnley coming up, mate, and they're sort of, the bottom three is a bit interesting at the moment, isn't it, mate? People seem to start, you know, they're picking up points here and there. I know Burnley just lost to Liverpool the other day, 2-0, but they got themselves a 2-0 win against Fulham, who had won their previous two games 5-0. And yeah, it's a bit of an interest to it. The bottom of the table, I think the sort of the three promoted sides will probably end up going back down. But at the moment, I mean, you know, look at Palace. Palace can't seem to buy a win. Nottingham Forest, I know they got a massive win against Newcastle the other day, but I don't necessarily think that the appointment of Nuno Espirito Santo is an inspiring one. I think it's probably a slightly backward step in terms of getting rid of Steve Cooper. I feel like it's still anyone's game really down there. And I mean, Everton are down there, but only because of the points deduction. They're not playing like they're a side destined for relegation at all. So this is going to be probably a bit more difficult than I think a lot of us would like to give credit to, mate. I'm hoping at least the past two games have sort of woken some Villa fans up to they're actually being difficult games.
Yeah, totally. Well, we're seeing sides to Villa that we hadn't seen yet so far this season creep into the side. The defeat to Man United is the first time we've dropped points from a winning position so far this season. And in doing so, we became the last team in the league to drop points from a winning position. So every other one of the 19 sides in the Premier League had gone up by 1 or 2 goals and then thrown it away. We were the last side to do that. And so it kind of, there's a real yardstick for just how far Villa have come, and that no team in the league is immune to this, whether you're Pep or Mikel Arteta, Jurgen Klopp, whoever you are. This is something that no team in the league has been able to avoid so far this season. And so I think we need to take that with perhaps a little grain of salt. Unai goes from one game, he'd never had a winning result at Old Trafford in his entire career, and that drought still goes on. But against Burnley, it's much more welcomed opposition for him, because in his entire managerial career in the Premier League, he's won every single game against Burnley. He's got a 100% record against them. And so hopefully these kind of things, the statistics start to swing back in Villa's favour. But no, you're absolutely right. Burnley, all of the teams down there are starting to show green shoots, really. Burnley got a massive win on the 23rd, kind of went under the radar given how chaotic the festive period can be. Got a 2-0 win at Craven Cottage. Fulham are a team that for now have their head well above the relegation zone. But yes, it is an uphill battle from here for clubs like Burnley and Luton Town, because Everton, as you mentioned, mate, playing fantastic football without that 10-point deduction. they'd be sat in the top half of the table. It's quite incredible, really. They would be sat 10th, just 3 points behind Newcastle. And the job that Sean Dyche is doing, he's almost the perfect manager for that situation. And so you imagine that Everton are only going to claw themselves further and further from the drop zone. The one thing that could save someone like Burnley or Luton is Crystal Palace getting a little bit too sentimental with Roy Hodgson and not acting quickly enough. I think they've got 1 win in their last 8, Palace, and the longer that Hodgson, because he's so experienced in the game, he's going to continue trusting his ways, but maybe those ways just aren't working for them. But Burnley won't be dreading this game like they perhaps would have been 2 weeks ago. And no longer is this a kind of easier 3 points as we perhaps saw it a couple of weeks ago either. We both saw, well, all Villa fans saw these 2 games either side of the trip to Old Trafford as, given Villa's home form, a pretty strong chance of 3 points. And I'm not saying that that's changed or anything like that. Villa's still going to this game, obviously, as clear favourites. But the more that you give these sides in and around the relegation zone a bit of a sniff, a glimmer of hope, the more that you give them matches to study where they can pick out weaknesses in the Villa squad, the more, you spoke about before the Sheffield United game that Chris Wilder's team really felt like they had a chance, like they had a way to get at Villa, and they were absolutely correct. And no doubt Burnley will come to Villa Park and feel the same.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Absolutely. And, listen, we still are obviously unbeaten at Villa Park in the league this season. It was only a draw against Sheffield United, but it will make it, that more believable to Burnley that they can go and get a point. I think the thing that goes in favour for us is, unlike Sheffield United, Burnley aren't going to sit back and get 11 men behind the ball and really dig in. I think Vincent Kompany has proven to be a decent manager, but he's also shown that he isn't really willing to compromise his style of play. And you can call it naive, you could call it admirable. I think ultimately in the Premier League, I know they've spent over £100 million, but that's pocket change in the Premier League at the end of the day. They signed as many players as we did when we came up, so they've spent about 10 mil a player. From the Championship, you just can't play that same way, not with the quality of players that they've been able to attract to the club. And the team you've got to be more than a silly partnership. We see with Emery. Emery's got so much, speaking about Dendoncker, the fact he's getting them kind of performances out of Leander Dendoncker. We've not seen that for probably like 3 or 4 years from Dendoncker, really, have we? It's only really from the sort of start of his period at Wolves where you'd have thought, wow, this is some player. He really sort of fell off a cliff after his first season and a half. Ultimately the responsibility falls on Vincent Kompany to find a way to get a result here. And do I think he's tactically as astute as Chris Wilder? Probably not. Chris Wilder's got, he's got the reps on his belt, mate, hasn't he? And yeah, I mean, I can tell you for a fact, them guys were absolutely gutted that they only walked away with 1 point. They were absolutely fuming. They couldn't believe that they gave it away. But that's football, innit, mate? That's football. Ultimately, this is a game that we should be winning. And I think it's, again, we mentioned at the top of the podcast, mate, like fitness for JJ. It's going to be important for him to get minutes here as well against sort of lesser opposition. This is the kind of game where you can really see someone like JJ hopefully thriving, mate, when he's fully firing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, mate. JJ will take a bit of time. I think he'll need weeks to find his. We know what the final product looks like, but he's someone that I'm really excited to see more of, because with every single kick of the ball, he'll just start to feed it a little bit more, and no doubt he'll be back in no time. I agree with you. This is a game that I think we should win. This is a game that I do think, given our track record this season, if you look at where we've had poor results, how we've bounced back, the next game has always been impressive. If you go all the way back to the first game of the season, obviously there's a 5-1 defeat at Newcastle. We bounced back with a 4-0 home win. From a 3-0 defeat at Anfield, the next game bounced back with a 3-1 home win against Crystal Palace. Every time we've kind of had a bit of a setback. You look at the FA Cup game, for example, where we lost 2-1 at home to Everton. The very next game, we put 6 past Brighton at home. The way that Unai really learns from adversity and makes sure that this Villa side will make mistakes, and this Villa side shouldn't be ashamed to make mistakes. But the one thing we need to learn to do is not make the same mistakes twice. And Villa, by and large, have been very, very good at that. And I think we do deserve some credit, whether that be in the Conference League. We went down 3-2 to Legia Warsaw in our first game in the Conference League. And then that very weekend, we went and beat Chelsea 1-0 at Stamford Bridge. And so Villa do have a very good track record of digging themselves out of holes very, very quickly. And I think that's admirable. And I think it says a lot about the mentality of the players, the mindset that is just currently running around Bodymore Heath. And given those kind of games and how we've seen Villa, we're very rarely let down twice in a row. I think that can give Villa fans some hope.
Absolutely, mate. I've got to ask you a score prediction, mate, before we go.
I will go, I think it'll be difficult. I'm going to go 2-1.
2-1? Okay. I'm going to say 1-0. I think there's only one goal in this. I think the boys are going to be tired. They're going to be jaded. But ultimately, I think we can get it done. But guys, let us know your predictions in the comment section down below. Let us know your thoughts on everything we've discussed. The 2 games against Sheffield United, Man United, off the field stuff, everything. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. This is going to be on YouTube in full, so you guys are in for a treat. But if you are on Spotify and Apple, make sure you download, follow the pod, leave a review, share it with your friends. It helps us out more than you could know. We were looking at the Spotify rap stuff the other day, weren't we, mate? And it's mad to see that we're sort of in people's Spotify raps. So hopefully we can be in more. If, as I say, make sure you're doing all that on those platforms. If you're on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, and up the Villa.